Hello, hello, and welcome to episode 79 of Trails in the Pod. I'm Colin. That's Kevin.
Turmoil has engulfed the Galactic Republic. The taxation of trade routes to outlying star systems is in dispute. Hoping to resolve the matter with a blockade of deadly battleships, the greedy Trade Federation has stopped all shipping to the city-state of Crossbell. That's right, it's a crossover. Today's episode is all about I think, a legitimately fascinating, fantastic topic. Trade disputes, trade conferences, imperial powers, weak powers, observers, because this is the second part of Chapter 2 of Trails to Azure.
Specifically, it is day three. We're hitting the politics, we're hitting the geopolitics, we're hitting the international politics. This is our bread and butter. We're going to be doing some close reading of key passages thanks to Trails in the database, which Kevin tried to search, and then I had to tell him to stop because he almost spoiled himself for plot twists that happened later in the game. But I think we managed to keep that from happening. Kevin, before we get started, what were your impressions of this? It's been a bit for you since you've played this chapter because we haven't recorded in a week. Um, and plus, you had beaten it before we recorded last time. But tell me what your general thoughts are about this chapter as a whole.
The chapter's three parts. Crossbell before we go into Orchis Tower, the mostly visual novel-esque aspects of Orchis Tower itself, the preparations, meeting the people, trade conference, getting to know some of the players, major, minor, official or not. Then the gameplay section going through Orcus Tower, going through Geofront, culminating in a boss fight. First part I thought was okay. The side quests, they were fine. Some interesting stuff, but it was, I don't want to say generic, but nothing all that new. I thought the second part, the conference, everything about it, fantastic. Getting to see people like Osborne, like Locksmith, getting to Rockwood,
Rocksmith.
Rocksmith, getting to talk to them, talk to Lecter, talk to Killicud, talk to someone that I know from Cold Steel 1. Tell her that was cool. It was great. Seeing the discussions, the deliberations on the future, or maybe not, of Crossbell. The last part was good. I mean, it's how you end the chapter. You need a boss fight. You need the combat. It was good. I enjoyed it. I got my JRPG senses with the wait a minute, this final fight is way too easy. I better save my stuff for the real boss fight.
Yeah, I mean, I generally agree with you. I will say so. Something that we keep coming up against in our podcast is that for this game, I'm playing the hidden quests and Kevin is not. And I think that it has never hurt him more than on day three specifically. So we have a couple of side quests. We have um, a monster fight that is a bit of a pain in the ass to find, but then you fight him and you kill him, bada bing, bada boom, not a problem. We have a quest in which you are playing Rail Inspector like you did in the first game. There's an extra scene if you had met Zin on day two for that hidden quest, which I thought was kind of cool. You have your standard Phantom B quest. I don't think it added particularly much, but it's always nice to see them. And then there's this hidden quest called Dark Side of the Moon, where the person who you are helping is Reese, from Trails the Third, who's currently at Crossbell Cathedral as an undercover Grolls Ritter. And you're going back to the Moon Temple, where you have to like guide her to where that bell was that we had to shut down in the last game. It's kind of nice to revisit old territory. It's kind of nice to see Reese again. But in the process of this, the SSS learns that Reese is a Grolls Ritter. They confirm that they know that Kevin is a Grolls Ritter, not this Kevin, Kevin Graham. And then at the end of it, Campanella shows up, showing cognizance of the SSS and Reese as a Grolls Ritter working together. Kevin has complained that some of these quests should not be hidden. This one kind of seems like it shouldn't have been hidden.
My thoughts on Hidden Quest are well known, but I want to get into what were the developers thinking in how to get people, or how they thought people would stumble upon this quest. Looking on Neo Secret Online, you had to go to the Maze Mountain Road, go through the tunnel, go to where the Moon Temple is located. You'll see an event by the barricade. There's no quest by the Moon Temple. There's no one telling you, oh, check this out by the Moon Temple. So, what vanishingly small portion, I wonder. I wish there was an achievement for these hidden side quests so we could see online on Steam what percent do them. Because I did that and we talked briefly about it for completion for the various games, and it's pretty high, the completion rate. But
Well, I guess it would have to be if everybody completes the quests, that means that they've completed all the hidden quests too.
yes, but I want a specific or maybe a certain amount of hidden quests. I would like to see an achievement just to get a rough ballpark, a rough estimate. What are people doing with them?
So I will say I agree with you on this one in particular. I mean, it's so important for the setting of the world that it really should have been like kind of like the Olivier quest where the game tells you, "Hey, go meet up with Olivier, go meet up with Mueller." You know, they should have done the same thing here, especially since okay, you can say that the police should go on the rounds around Crossbell. So you go around all the places in the city. So it is possible that you might go to Highway on day two to do the tour with Zin. That is possible. It is extraordinarily unlikely that you are visiting every single location in the game, especially since the fast travel does not take you directly to the Moon Temple. It takes you to halfway through the Mains Mountain Road, where you then have to run the rest of the way. So unless you have a guide, then you're probably not going to find it. Of course, people did find it, so somebody was putting in the legwork all those years ago. But I would say most people are only finding it because they're doing like what I'm doing, and they're going onto NeoSeeker and saying, "Oh, there's a hidden quest. Let me go grab that."
I don't like going on NeoSeeker on these guide websites and I'm playing any kind of video game because that breaks you out of the immersion. It takes you out of the constructed reality, so to speak, for lack of a better term, and reinforces the artificiality of what you were engaging with. So it feels always, I don't want to say jarring, but there is something about having to resort to a guide. It's not organic. And something like this should be organic.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. Normally, I'm a defender of these hidden quests, but on this one, I just think you're right.
Some of them, I do agree that by being naturally curious and exploring, you will stumble upon them. There's a good amount in which the hidden conditions are not onerous by any means. And again, the ones here are onerous, and then compared to the payout of this is important for the society. For I imagine the main plot of this game in some aspect for the future of the society, calling back to the most recent entry before Crossbell of the third, so it is mind-boggling. And about the going to resort to a guide, I want to, in brief, talk about Doll Napped. Okay, so Dollhouse was a celebrated television show by Joss Whedon after Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Firefly, and Angel that starred Elijah Dushku. But Doll Napped is a side quest in Trails to Azure. It's the Phantom Bee side quest of the game, it seems. We get a message from Mirabelle, her dolls have been kidnapped or doll napped. And while I think the correct attitude would be stop playing with dolls, you're a creepy person. That's this is good karma. We have to go solve it. So justice and legality are not the same thing in this instance. I tried, and for a good number of them, to puzzle out the location of where did the Phantom Bee store each doll, the general spot on the map, and for most of them, it was unable to do that. I thought it was quite difficult. Some of these specific spots, I'm thinking in particular on the railroad with the port going into and out of Crossbell. I had to go look to a guide, and even then, it took no small amount of time to line it up perfectly. So I wish for these make it once you know where to go, make it easy.
I mean, even with a guide, it was still difficult to get to that spot. Not like physically difficult, right? We could all move the joystick. It doesn't take that long, but you're trying to hit this box, and then you realize you have to like run three staircases around to get to the other side, so you can hit it there. I play Phantom Bee quests with a guide. Like to me, that's just my default. I don't really want to spend time figuring out these riddles. I find them frankly obtuse. I got other shit to do. I did not solve them the first time I played it. I'm definitely not solving them this time. And so, I mean, and perhaps that's why I feel kind of ambivalent to the Phantom Bee quests. I like that they're there because they're a good callback to SC. I like it when long-running series have these kinds of traditions. And so, like, I'm happy to see it, but I'm also not the target audience for it, you know? And this is one of those things where as soon as I see that it pops up, my ass goes to my laptop, to NeoSeeker, figure out the solutions, and then, I go off and enjoy myself after that.
You raised a number of interesting points I want to touch on in detail briefly. One, enjoyment. Two, the riddles. Three, what is the purpose of these? One, and I'm going to go do them in reverse order. The purpose of these. It's a mainstay of the games, but we don't learn all that much about Phantom B, about this society, about whatever. Is it the tradition for tradition's sake? Is that sufficient? Is that enough? Should there be more personal input with Phantom B, with a enforcer of Ouroboros? I wonder about that. And two, these riddles are very obtuse. I like a good riddle. These riddles are such that Bilbo would not deploy them to Gollum in the caves under the Misty Mountain because he'd be thinking, no, 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 no. That's way too random, not a proper riddle. And that mofo was like, what's in my pocket? So that's an indictment. Three,
I'm glad that you spelled that out for the non Lord of the Ring fans, including myself on the podcast.
I think it's really telling, really interesting how you like, I'm going to do this so I can go back to enjoying myself. This is not enjoyable. And that's not a good thing for a game to have as a, not a big portion, but a expected component of the side quest, something that is not enjoyable.
It's weird, right? Because so I recently played Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. We can already tell there's going to be a long episode with some of these side tangents, but I recently played it. I didn't quite complete it, but I completed a lot of it. I mean, I spent 95 hours in there. I did most of the stuff on the map.
Jesus.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I people were saying, "Oh, yeah, you're not playing enough Azure." That's right. It's because I was playing Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Fucking love that game. And part of this game's DNA is that in each of the regions, there's like 15 side things for you to do. And most of them are repetitive, clear this tower there, do this little mini game here, stuff like that. Some of them are enjoyable because the core gameplay is interesting, the combat in the game is fun. Some of them have unique mini games that are fun to play around with, like the Fort Condor mini game continues to be a really fun thing to do. There's also stuff where I do this so that I can unlock other content that's fun. So if I want to find where the next minigame stage is, I have to go to these different spots on the map and play a very short, press the button at the right time thing. Or same if I want to unlock a summon, I have to do a short mini game like that. That is not fun in and of itself, but I like the reward I get for it, either in the form of I get stronger or in the form of things that I actually want to do.
Indeed.
And in that case, that's busy work. But I also didn't find myself minding it. Sometimes I would just be like, all right, I need 10 hours to clear out this region so I can get all this stuff. Time to put on Meet the Press and listen to that while I'm playing the game. And, I was fine with it. I can't say that on each moment to moment basis, I was having the most fun in the game, but I didn't mind it. And this is going to sound a little counterintuitive from what you were just saying. And maybe they're just two different design philosophies or quest design philosophies, which is something that we want to talk about in a later episode, vis-a-vis the conversation we had this morning about an academic paper. Sometimes I think that you need a break. You can't always be high, 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 always having like the best time, or not necessarily even high octane, but like sometimes a game of a large size needs to give the player room to breathe and disengage before they get engaged again. So while I don't think this was the intention of the designer of the Phantom B quest, that quest does that for me, where I'm like, all right, I'll just go ahead and get this busy work done. And then coming into Orcus Tower, now I'm paying the more attention, as opposed to always being on.
Next sidebar topic. Should there be more Calvinism in the Trails series? Colin says yes.
Well, I'm sure the German audience is sniggering a little bit.
Well, I thought it was funny. Anything more to discuss for the side quest before we get to Orcus Tower? Now, the opinions on Dolnap, can vary, but overall they're fine. The meat of this chapter, the meat of this episode is Orcus Tower. It's essentially economics and geopolitics and strategy.
I will say, I mean, we talk about economics. For the player, it's not much about economics. We're told they talk about economics, but it's mostly national defense that we get to see the conversations about. I agree. We should move to Orcus Tower. why don't you give us a brief overview of the events of Orcus Tower, and then we can move to close reading a section that I wanted to pull out.
This is a conference that's been planned for some time between Erebonia, Calvard, Liberal, and to an extent Crossbell. The meeting in Crossbell itself. The two imperial powers, one's an empire, one's a republic, but you can have a republic and have an empire. Look at Rome. The meeting in Crossbell. I find that really interesting. Having Erebonia go to Calvard or vice versa would put one as the patron, one as the supplicant. One is traveling to get something that they want. From the start, it's an inferior, superior position. But Colin, why not have it in Liberal? Wouldn't that make sense also? Well, Livonia fought Liberal just 10 or so years ago in the Hundred Day War. Decisive defeat, won. But on the other hand, you would think possibly with the Liberals' foreign policy of this non aggression pact between the three main powers, Crossbell, interestingly, not invited, not a signatory. They could be a possibly neutral spot, but they were not. It's in Crossbell, a city state with a tenuous grasp of independence. The security is up the wazoo. The SSS is not taking part in the conference. We're not delegates. We are here to make sure nothing happens, to do security sweeps, and that's what gives the SSS, Lloyd and Co. the pretext to go and attend. The first part is fairly simple. Under the aegis of Dudley, we go through the rooms, familiarize ourselves with the people that are there, what few have come. It's maids, cleaning people, security, and so forth. Then the delegates arrive. It's the main participants are Liberal, Erebonia, Calvary. But there's more than that here, besides Crossbow, besides those four. There's the Prince of Emefaria, who's an observer, but from the comments that they make.
No, he is not an observer. Remiferi is not an observer. They're at the table.
Oh, I thought they were there. That's interesting.
The only two observers are Arios McLean and Grimwood.
So why them? They have the medicine, they have technology, but I don't believe, for example, the Lehman state was attending. I don't believe that Arteria, the city state with the Pope, the Church, Northumbria, any of the other minor powers. Why them affair? Is it only the technology and the medicine? Is there anything else? It didn't seem all that neutral. I would have expected, neutral or be more cynical or for sale player, but they were not. They were partisan in the little that we saw of them.
How were they partisan?
Oh, they made comments in support of Libero's condemnation of Calvary and Erebonia, openly discussing the ending of Crossbell's independence.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I necessarily call that partisan or I mean, the fact of the matter is that they're a part of the conference. So I don't know if we should expect them to be neutral. I don't know why you expected them to be neutral. But partisan to me, it would indicate like they're with Erebonia or with Calvert, and they are with neither. And so in that sense, they're kind of a third way, as Olivier would put it.
They seem to with Libero to an extent.
So I think one of the reasons why they're there, because it's not like this conference came ex nihilo, right? It's not like it just happened, or it's not like Erebonia and Calvert got together and said, "Hey, let's go. Let's have this conference. Let's have it in Crossbell." This is something that was created and hosted by Crossbell by the direction of Dieter Croy in Orcus Tower. Orcus Tower being the continent's first skyscraper. It's meant to be this imposing building. It's meant to show Crossbell at the center of the world. At least that's how some of the characters in the game take it. And so you have to ask yourself, why would Crossbell invite different people? Calvert, Erebonia, no brainer. Biggest economic trading partners. This is a trade conference, as we've said, though the players see so much of the economics part. But obviously, Erebonia and Calvert have to be there. Liberal should be there because also there's lots of trade and commerce between them. Also, Liberal is a good balancing act between Calvert and Erebonia, so it's advantageous for Crossbell to have them. And then we have seen in the game how Remiferia is more present in Crossbell, especially in this game, right, where we've seen the medical stuff. I mean, Crossbell Medical Center is, I'm sorry, St. Anselm, I think it's called. But their hospital is really important.
St. Ursula?
St. Ursula, not St. Anselm. Good God. St. Ursula is really important. It's pretty world renowned. It's probably like the second most advanced medical center, but Remiferia is the top. Their new head of medicine is from Remiferia. We had a novel in the last game written about Remiferia, which suggests at least a little bit of soft power. So, do we have the best measurements of different people's economic powers? Not necessarily, but Remiferia seems to stand out amongst the other minor powers. Like North Ambria is a disaster. These are all of like where the Jaegers are coming from. Lehman's State, you're right. It probably could be there, especially given TO and the ties to like the huge technology that's being put into Crossbell. So it's interesting that they're not there. Arteria isn't there, mostly because they're religious and not so much of an economic powerhouse. I didn't know why they weren't there because I thought that Arteria had blessed Crossbell's sovereignty. And I've been saying this for years. And then we have a conversation between Ellie and Grimwood and everybody confirming that no, Arteria has confirmed the sovereignty of all of these other autonomous states that are not nations. I don't know, like they talk about states and nations. I would rather talk about states and empires, but that's a quibble I have with the translation of the game. Not even necessarily the translation, might be the Japanese. But in any case, these more minor powers are not invited, but they are still recognized as being able to participate in international politics because they have the blessing of the Pope. Crossbell doesn't because its autonomy is granted at the behest of both Erebonia and Calvard. So it cannot come from the Pope. It has to come from these two political empires. So to me, that's why they're all involved.
What does Dieter get out of this? What does Crossbell get out of this if it's a success? They get to have the Imperial.
I mean, if it's a success, it gets way more international prestige. It gets recognition of the fact that it's the economic powerhouse of the world. Also, by building ties with Liberal and Remiferia, in addition to Calvard and to Erebonia, it makes them more legitimate on the world stage and perhaps could eventually angle for a diplomatic way to become independent.
I have a question for you. We know ambassadors exist, that embassies exist in Zemuria. We've been to embassies in multiple games.
Mhm.
I wonder why we don't see embassies or legations
Yeah,
or envoys between the imperial powers in Crossbell. And I kind of wonder if would one of the consequences of a successful trade conference be the opening up of an Erebonian embassy, Calvard, Liberal, Ramiferian envoy or legation in Crossbell itself?
I think that would have to come later because to me, like the problem is, and this is really highlighted here, is that it's not like Erebonia doesn't lay claim to Crossbell. It does. Calvert also lays claim to Crossbell. So the current autonomy is more of a ad hoc peace agreement rather than like a final political solution. If Erebonia puts an embassy on Crossbell, by definition, they have to be denying their control over Crossbell. You don't have an embassy in a place in a place that you control. Like that's just a fact. On the same time, they have to keep up. Like there has to be this fiction that Crossbell belongs to either Erebonia or Crossbell or Calvert or both. So they can't allow embassies from Liberal or Remiferia in because, notionally speaking, they should be directed towards Erebonia or Calvert in the same way that I don't think there's a lot of embassies on Taiwan, even though we treat like I think most people like you and me would call Taiwan a separate nation, a separate country, but because we have to maintain the fiction of a one China policy, I don't believe we have embassies in Taiwan, even though we do have soft diplomatic relations with Taiwan.
I want to raise something interesting. It's not that relevant, but about non-independent embassies. There were embassies and ambassadors in the German
Okay.
Empire of 1871 to 1918 between the German states under the German Empire. There was ambassadors to Bavaria, to Prussia from, Württemberg, from Saxony to Saxony, with among these constituent states of the German Empire.
I mean, isn't that a relic of the extremely decentralized nature of the German lands?
It is, and it's not applicable to Crossbell. Could they be a ploy to not say Crossbell is independent, but have a rep representative or somehow, because wouldn't it make sense? Wouldn't the two powers of Irribone and Calvert want people on the ground in Crossbell on a permanent basis, if nothing else, to monitor their factions in the Diet, to have spying, a home base for spies and whatever?
Well, they definitely have spies. We already know that. I mean, Lecter, number one. But also, I do wonder, given that they have direct control over certain members of the Diet, how much personnel do they really need on the ground?
To prevent someone like, Hartman from going off in a tizzy. And I cannot imagine the Empire was pleased at what went on in the back half of Zero because it threatened their control and influence over Crossbell.
It did. I don't think we have a definitive answer to this question. I would wager that perhaps part of the treaty that gives Crossbell autonomy is that both Ereboni and Calvert agree not to have like permanent presences there. Part of the reason why they have the GCF and you have the two military fortresses at each side limiting the territory. It's a weird situation as we've talked about. This is a weird buffer state. It doesn't really capture the traditional view of a buffer state that we've been thinking about, which is what makes it so interesting. But speaking of sovereignty, we're about to experience a challenge to Crossbell sovereignty on the second half of the day of the trade conference. Do you want to get into that, Kevin?
Yeah, sure. And I loved it because it was showing that events have ramifications. Both Erebonia and Calvard noticed what went on in the back half of Zero, and they're not that pleased at this potential giant instability. What would have happened if the cult was successful? Who knows? They want a quiescent crossbow. They want a stable crossbow. So there's two alternatives that get floated about. One,
I don't. What alternatives? There seem to be one alternative.
no, there's two different ones. Crossbell and Airbonia and Calvert openly discuss the weaknesses of Crossbell, and they want a more active involvement in the state that they think can't properly govern itself. One proposition is disband the Crossbell Guardian Force entirely and allow foreign military presence, in a sense, an occupation on Crossbell territory. The other is a drastic reduction in the size of the CGF and allowing foreign observers that would, in reality, control the Crossbell Guardian Force.
I don't remember that one, but we're going to read this scene. So let's see. So the reason why we're going to read this out is because close reading lets you see things that you hadn't noticed before, and we want to make sure that we hit all the good details. So I'll start. I'll read the introductory scene, and I'll read Chancellor Osborne, and then Kevin and I can switch off on the characters and stop when we have a comment.
You're going to love my voice acting.
Okay, I'm not gonna be voice acting. Let's see what Kevin does. Okay. So just as Mr. Grimwood had predicted, the discourse became more turbulent in the second half of the conference. So clearly this is on Twitter. Chancellor Osborne and President Rocksmith continued to raise question after question aimed at Crossbell's security and future. As the conversation wore on, the looks on Mayor Croyce and Speaker McDowell's faces became even more sullen and stern. So Chancellor Osborne comes in and says, the heart of the problem is that a lone cult was able to cause so much public disorder in a single night, no less. Furthermore, half of Crossbell's state guard fell under their control. Such a failure of security is unprecedented. I'm going to stop here and ask Kevin a question. Is he wrong?
He's not wrong. This is not a illegitimate concern to have that an already not like literally unstable, but a potential flash ground for armed conflict or whatever with your largest, most unfriendly neighbor to the east, Calvert, Erebonia, almost fell to a coup. The entire military, half of it was suborned. This almost happened in a single night. Who knows what could have happened? Erebonia is not wrong to be extremely concerned about what went on, what almost went on. That's my opinion.
I think it's a little bit more nuanced than that because effort like Crossbell had been transparent about it and have put into place an ability. Well, they fixed the problem, and then they're also fixing the problem. So it's not quite as drastic as I was born to saying, but I see his framing of it.
The underlying problem is political instability because they're caught between a rock and a hard place, and that's not going to be solved in the near future.
So why don't you read Mayor Croyce and Speaker McDowell, and then you can decide if you want to read Chancellor Osborne or not.
Speaking McDowell, Be that as it may, ho 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 ho. I had thought we had already covered those details. The details are not what is in question. It is the quality of your state's crisis management that we're concerned about. You cannot deny the lives and property of Imperial citizens were threatened in the incident. What do you have to say to that?
And so then, before we talk about that, Prince Oliver steps in and goes, "Hold on for just a moment, Chancellor. Reparation procedures already took place regarding the cult incident. Asking for further Mira on top of it will only serve to cast Erebonia in an unfavorable light." And I find this interesting because normally when you're doing like geopolitics, summits, stuff like that, they don't have a state undercutting itself. You have one position, but here we have Prince Oliver, undercutting Chancellor Osborne. Of course, we have to keep in mind, as far as I'm aware, Olivier does not have any political power, and Chancellor Osborne has like all the political power. Olivier is an important factional member, but he cannot inherit the throne or anything like that. But here he's speaking on behalf of the crown of Arabonia, telling Chancellor Osborne that his objection is not favorable to Arabonia. It's not good.
Is it known, I wonder, that Prince Olivert is not a member of the noble faction? If that is the case, then Erebonia looks massively not as powerful. If we have Chancellor Osborne, who serves, I believe, at the pleasure of the Emperor. We have Duke Cayenne Pepper, and we have Prince Olivert, with a third faction, a monarchist faction. So
I don't know if it's necessarily monarchist. I think he's more like law and order almost.
from the perspective of, say, Calvert, and if they have, incomplete information or varying degrees of penetration into Erebonian politics, they should be on this like catnip because it shows that a state undercutting itself is not good and it can play one off the other. Calvert, I mean, Erebonia is not a unified player. It's different factions within the state.
And I like how Osborne is kind of painting this too. I mean, at first he starts about like, we're concerned about Crossbell, but then he's turning it into, well, we're actually concerned about imperial citizens. And this is one of the ways that a state, especially a powerful state to a lower powered state, is able to justify intervening into the internal affairs because it's actually protecting our own citizens. This is something that comes up again and again throughout world history as a justification.
Myra is not the issue either, Your Highness. The Crossbell state government has still yet to answer how it can guarantee true security. There is a need to protect the lives, property, and economic interest of all those in and tied to Crossbell. Is such protection guaranteed from a state constantly in political gridlock and susceptible to top-down corruption?
So this is fascinating because he is blaming Crossbell for being unable to do things, and yet he is one of the leading reasons why Crossbell is unable to do things. And I think this is kind of, I don't want to sound like I'm pro Osborne in terms of substance because I'm not, but in terms of defining your problem, he's able to keep Crossbell down by bribing Diet members, by keeping Gridlock up. I mean, he had control of Hartman as well, let's not forget. If anybody had more control over Crossbell than Osborne did, it's hard to see who, except maybe McDowell. And he's able to use the weaknesses that he has created to rhetorically support his arguments that Crossbell is unable to be a functioning state.
It's brilliant political maneuvering, and these exchanges show us, they tell us, and they show us through telling why he has the reputation that he does. I think it's quite effective. We're not left wondering, this is the guy everyone's so concerned about.
No, we can see it immediately. And it's not even like something that games might fall into is telling you that somebody is great, and then you have to believe them. We aren't being told this. We're being shown this to the point where for the first time we're dissecting these line by line. And so so go on.
A character is only as smart as the writer, can only be as smart as the writer, I should say. And this is a good sign for the writers of Kaseki.
Yeah. So to move on a little bit, Oliver doesn't really answer. Prince Albert comes in and states, "Pardon me, but I'd heard former Speaker Hartman was immediately removed from office upon his corruption coming to light. Crossbell's political system has been shown capable of correcting itself. Wouldn't a new security system suffice? So he's trying to pull, the more moderate, like recognizing there's some security problems, sure. But because Osborne is saying like it's actually because of the top-down corruption, Albert's trying to bring up the point that there have been anti-corruption measures, right? This is a problem that has been they're trying to fix it and they're making steps towards it. It seems a bit premature to come in and now impose an outside solution when they're already making good progress.
I want to offer a counter rebuttal to that. I think that's a bit rosy tinted glasses.
Okay.
One, the corruption is not a new problem, not an unknown problem between politics, patron, and underworld of Crossbell, the three Ps. It's not something that just came to light. People have been aware of this. Remember Ellie's almost breakdown? Remember the malaise that affected people about Crossbell's future all throughout Zero that we talked about and said is very well done.
Hmm.
So I think this is a bit, yeah, he was removed after the state almost fell to a supernatural coup that was only came as close as it did because one, it got half the military, and two, they were able to plan this in quite some time, relying on the known problems of the Crossbow government.
I mean, I do want to support Albert a little bit here because I think that if there are forward signs of solving problems, and it's not the only one. I mean, there's leadership change. Instead of having Hartman and McDowell, now you have Dieter Croix and McDowell. McDowell being the only respectable political person that we know of, and then people also have a lot of respect for Dieter Croix, and we can see physically how he's managing to get things done. I mean, I'm not a big fan of putting business people in terms of into executive power, but he is doing that and he is unleashing this tower. He's kind of restoring hope to Crossbell by giving them something to believe in. And now you can point out that this does not mean that he's going to be effective at reducing corruption in the future. And in fact, as a banker, he's probably going to open it up more. But at least in the short term that he's been in power, things have been going on the up and up. Why would you want to screw with that right now?
Conspiracy theory in me wonders how much of it was him creating problems that only he could solve, that he could solve by not creating them, sustaining them anymore. We'll get to that later. Next, we have President Rocksmith, who I think has an unintentionally revealing admission. I must disagree, your lordship. Surely you don't think it would be that easy. Crossbow's political foundation is prone to corruption by nature. Put a pin in that. That said, I of course know that Mayor Croy and Speaker McDowell here are outstanding statesmen. However, what would happen to Crossbell without them? How quickly would things regress without their leadership? So we have two items here. One, a system dependent on a charismatic personal leadership is only as stable as the people themselves. When they die, get corrupted, fall out of favor, fall out of office, what say you? That stability is gone. Two, the political foundation prone to corruption by nature. This is all but openly saying that Crossbell's geopolitical situation and the political factions make it unstable. And he's a large part of that. It's a mirror to Osborne's comment about these are issues. We have concerns over stability. Yeah, because you're one of the people making it unstable. And here, yeah, you're one of the ones who make it so endemically corrupt.
I find Rocksmith and Osborne to be fascinating contrasts because they ultimately are doing the same thing, but they do it in different forms. They say things in a different way. So like Osborne, as we've seen in this reading, he's very direct. He's throwing his big Osborne dick around, beating people up, trying to get his way. And this is the same way when he was talking to the SSS before this session, when he was talking about how long do you think Crossbell will be independent, right? He's basically telling them eventually this place is going to get conquered. It's probably going to be Erebonia that does it. He recognizes the worth the SSS has, but isn't trying to like co-opt them or attract them or anything like that. He's just stating the fact of the matter. When you visit Rocksmith, who I visited first, I don't know if you can visit him second. What he wants to do is offer the SSS a medal, acknowledging their role in saving But he can do that because he's claiming sovereignty to Crossbell. He can only give the medal because if they were to accept the medal, they would be recognizing Calvert's claim to sovereignty over Crossbell. And so he has the same predatory wanting to claim Crossbell, but he does it in a much nicer tone. And we see it here too, right? With that said, I of course know that Mayor Croix and Speaker McDowell here are outstanding statesmen because he has to show off this more conviviality, but his point is the same that something is rotten in the state of Crossbell and it needs to be fixed.
I have a devil's advocate question about the medals. Say a king gives a visiting
Okay.
duke or industrialist a medal, or you're a knight of the garter. I'm going to make you an honorary admiral of the fleet. How would that not be claiming sovereignty, but locksmith giving medals to the
Mhm.
SSS would be? Is it because the Calvert is from the start in this unequal relationship?
Well, to take your example of the Knight of the Garter, that is a extra national, extra political organization. So you can give a medal recognizing somebody in your organization without having it be claims over political power over them. Whereas with Rocksmith, he would be doing it in his office as the president of Calvard, giving this to a Calvardian citizen.
Okay, so in that's a good one.
Now, a question that I have that might throw this out of the water is like, so our highest honor in the U.S. is the Presidential Medal of Honor or Medal of Freedom. What is it called?
It's the Congressional Medal of Honor and the Presidential Medal of Freedom.
Medal of Freedom. Obviously, we give that says what? Well, I don't think we've ever given the Presidential Medal of Freedom to a non-citizen. That we haven't given it to a foreign national or anything. And if we have, it would be for somebody like Lafayette, who's basically an American anyway.
Mother Teresa was given the medal, Margaret Thatcher. So it is not restricted to American citizens.
We gave it to Margaret Thatcher.
He's much more of a conventional politician.
Well, in any case, I think that he's being a snake in the grass. Shall we continue with our reading? So Prince Albert just goes, And then here we have Chloe, Princess Claudia. Corruption exists in every form of government. That is not true of only Crossbell, but of my kingdom, the borough, as well. That taken into consideration, would it not be best for us to observe whether the speaker and mayor can bring political reform during their terms? This is the same line as Albert.
I'm gonna let you finish. I'm gonna let you finish, Colin. But Chloe's haircut looks great.
So there's a guy on Twitter I had to block because he made too many horny comments about Chloe. Don't you get starting here.
I think there's an unintentional, maybe intentional, but something really interesting going on with her third statement. Would it not be best for us to observe? She is, by implication, placing Liberal and Liberal's interest in Crossbell on an equal or semi-equal footing with Erebonia
Mhm.
and Carver. We three powers can observe. It helps Crossbell, yes, the term to fruition, can they succeed or fail, but it states Liberal is equal to those two imperial states and has a vested interest in Crossbell. So it is pumping up Crossbell and pumping up Liberal. She's a good person, but she is pro-Liberal first.
This is something that I hadn't realized, but I think you're right. I don't know if it's putting her on equal terms with Calvert and Erebonia. I think that would be kind of difficult to swing, but it's certainly bringing Liberal into the situation, into the equation, that it's not just a decision between the two sovereigns, but it's about the global community. I mean, same reason with that Remiferia is involved in this too. And that's that we have to say that that is good for Dieter to bring her there because I don't think she would be there if Dieter Croy didn't invite Liberal to the table. I think also the fact that she's framing it not as we should never take action. She's framing it as let's observe, let's wait and see. Delaying tactics can just be a way to stop there being action, but at least in the short term, that gives people an off ramp to say, okay, well, we won't do anything now, but it's still on the table. Not that Osborne or Rocksmith is likely to take that off ramp, but it's easier pill to swallow than no, we're not going to do anything about Crossbell. They invited us here for Christ's sake, and you want to take over their land? Like, come on.
Next would be let's have a commission to study the issue.
Yeah, exactly. We'll circle back to that.
Let's touch base in the future. Next, Osborne says, Pardon me for saying so, Your Highness, and you know what is going to
Yep.
come out of his mouth next is not going to be a sincere pardon. But I believe that it's rather naive of you. I understand why we'd be so hopeful. However, Crossbell is much different than a monarchy such as liberal. It is easy to undermine the political system of something that has no central or traditional authority. History has proven that time and again. Osborne said, "Your child, you don't know anything. Liberal is not the be all end all, and Crossbell is a fake nation."
He's saying that, but what's interesting to me is that he's saying it in a way that I don't think is actually true. We spent a lot of time talking about Liberalian politics, and it's not like Liberal is a traditional monarchy. They had nobility in the past, that got abolished. And then all of the main people that are actually carrying out stuff in Liberal are not necessarily agents of the monarch, but they're elected mayors, mostly elected mayors. So to me, this makes Liberal more of a decentralized confederation than a traditional or central monarchy.
Yeah, I was going to say something, a hot take that I think now you will vehemently disagree with, but are you ready?
I'm ready.
The Queen of Liberal has more power than Osborne, than Rocksmith, than McDowell slash Croy.
Fucking how?
She's an absolute monarch. There's no legislator. There's no nobility. It's a series of mayors who can be turned out whose terms in office are limited. And from what we saw, she has complete authority over the military and over the central financial apparatus, over the national royal bureaucracy.
Kevin, the most economic activity we saw in Liberal was a marketplace in Bose.
It's also the Zeiss factory.
Yeah, which is also not in control of the monarchy.
They owe allegiance.
I mean, I just find it hard. Yes, okay, there's no legislature. We can say that the queen is passing laws, but I haven't seen a law she ever passed.
Is that because of the game, though? The game not telling us about how a bill becomes a law?
But I mean, that's the only thing we have to go off of.
You know why, Colin? It's going to sound kind of insane, but Liberal has no laws. There's no body to make laws. They have royal decrees and edicts that have the force of laws that are substitutes, but they don't have laws as we would understand them, passed by even a powerless or semi-powerless body of.
Kevin, in order to have laws, you need to have law enforcement, and the closest thing we have to law enforcement is the Bracer Guild.
All the policemen were hiding. They were on vacation.
We spent 3 games of me telling you that there is a concept of police, but it's in Crossbell, not in Liberal, and there we have no law enforcement. There's the army. We've seen some of that happen.
Yeah, there's the army doing that, so which is again under royal command.
Okay, but the army seems to only have very minimal ability to do that and only a limited purview. I mean, I'm sorry, the more I think about Liberal, the more it seems like a feudal
It's an
kingdom
absolute
of like a
monarchy
barony.
that uses the
It
army
is not an
as law
absolute monarchy.
enforcement.
If you compare this to fucking Louis the 14th, you would shit your pants with how wrong you are.
You're right, Colin. The Queen has more power than Louis the 14th. There's no nobility to restrain her.
Okay, okay. Be that as it may, Chancellor Osborne is claiming.
You say Chloe gives a, I don't know why, it's a very anime-esque response, at least to me.
Okay, well, I'm not there yet. I was still talking about Chancellor Osborne. He's trying to make this is a pro-monarchy argument, right? He's trying to make this claim representative government, that democratic government, is always susceptible to being undermined. Whereas a traditional monarchy, like he claims Liberal is, but that Erebonia definitely is, even though Erebonia has a diet, it's still far more absolutist than Liberal is. That is where you find stability. And that's what this line means. History has proven that time and time again. She says, that may be true. And then I'm going to read President Rocksmith. If I may, my country also does not have a monarchy, but an honorable republic charter. It was an impressive undertaking by various powers and groups that gathered after our revolution 100 years ago. With that charter in place, our country knows our system can survive and improve, even if it may at times, too, be stricken with corruption. I gotta say that here, he seems to be arguing against Osborne completely, and almost is arguing for Crossbell by pointing out that democratic governments can be improved over time.
I think it shows that he really is a believer in democracy and Republican forms of government, while at the same time being an unrepentant, small eye imperialist who wants to suborn Crossbell. But this suggests he and maybe Calvert as a whole really do believe in Republican government and especially in political pluralism, because as we learn throughout, who are his opponents, Colin, in Calvert?
The anti-immigration front. I do want to push back on you at one point. I see nothing here that tells me that Rocksmith actually believes in republicanism. It doesn't mean that he doesn't, but we both know that political performance is a thing. And of course, the man of the most powerful representative democracy on earth has to stand there and talk about the powers of representative democracy.
It would make, I think, make his case for divvying up Crossbell easier if he didn't make this interjection.
Maybe, but maybe he has his own angle.
But it does show that he is not a xenophobe because he seems to have the undying hatred of those who don't like the what they call the pollution of Crossbell's society.
That's true. Or at the very least, that people who hate immigrants hate him too. Doesn't mean that he's anti-immigrant or pro-immigrant. We can see even in our own time how these things kind of you attach labels to people and hate them depending on your issues, not because of what they actually believe in.
Speaker McDowell, so you say, but it is not as though our autonomous state law isn't without its own pride and honor. It's true that in our state's young history, imperfections in its design have come to light. However, so too is it that we have been improving upon them slowly but surely. This rhetoric that he employs, that McDowell uses, is small c conservative rhetoric. We have honor, we have pride. We don't do radical changes, we make them slowly, surely, improving on what's already there. It seems calculated to diffuse what an empire would say.
I think you're reading too much into that part, but I will say that I read this to be an incredibly weak rejoinder, like almost aggravatingly weak. And maybe you're right that it's trying to diffuse, because maybe you don't want to be screaming in Osborne's face. But, just to sit there and be like, well, we've been making improvements over time. All that is doing is repeating what Remifaria and Liberal have already said. You'd want somebody with a stature of McDowell to be able to at least show specifics and maybe start hitting back at Osborne. You're talking about security. You have a civil war brewing in your empire, buddy. Should we take, over control over your military?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a weak rejoinder because he's in a very weak position. Crossbell did not cover itself with glory with the events of the end of Zero.
They did not, but to push back on you, they did fix it. I mean, the SSS fixed it, but the SSS is part of Crossbell. They fixed it internally. They have rebuilt their military force, and now they have this big, huge ass skyscraper that they're all sitting in doing an economic trade conference, at least for the moment. And part of this conversation is them losing that stature. But for right now, Crossbell has some leverage and has some, status to play around with. And McDowell does not do that. And I think it's because for the longest time he couldn't. He was the politician of the past that could lead Crossbell throughout this period of just staying alive. But I think that this kind of shows him not really meeting the moment.
I don't think he was that good a mayor. He seemed ossified. His chief aide tried to kidnap his granddaughter.
I mean, that's true, but I mean, I've watched The West Wing, and President Bartlett's daughter got kidnapped by terrorists. That doesn't make Jed Bartlett a bad president.
It would have made him a bad president if Leo was the one who kidnapped Zoe.
I mean, yeah, fine. I don't know. I like him. I just don't think. I think this is kind of showing that there needs to be a new generation.
Wannabe autocrats. Data Croix is sus.
All right, why don't you read Osborne and I'll read Grimwood?
This next part I just think is it's silly. We'll discuss why. Mr. Grimwood, may I ask how many additional
Sure.
laws and amendments have been passed by Crossbell's government in the last 10 years? But of course, Sensei, I do not have the exact figure in front of me. However, I would estimate 50 in total. Though a small city council passes way more than 50 laws a year.
Exactly. I think that's what they're trying to push. I mean, why don't we continue down and then we can talk about this? But Rocksmith points out just 50 in 10 years. That's an average of only 5 a year. Mayor Croy says perhaps, though the rate has been increasing in recent years, There were 12 laws passed last year, if I'm not mistaken. That's a victory for them. And then McDowell finished this off by pointing out that admittedly, many of those pertain to additions in finance and the establishment of the Orbital Network, which is a strength for them and seems to have some bipartisan consensus. My point here is this. You point out that a small city council passes more laws than that. A country will pass even more. In the current day, if you watch the news, we will see infographics of how few bills Congress this year has passed because of the chaos with the speakers and all of that kind of stuff. And that's deemed to be a pretty poor thing. In comparison to these numbers, the US is doing fucking great. Crossbell, I mean, we really are seeing in how much deadlock they are that in 10 years they can pass 50 laws. So I do think that here the Osborne does a great job rhetorically at breaking up the ineffectualness of the Crossbellian government. And here Dieter Croy also he tries, I think he does a better job than McDowell at like sticking up for Crossbell, but still like saying, well, now it's gotten better. Last year we passed 12 laws.
Then Osborne had a rejoinder. Regardless, I think it's clear that we cannot assume that a new meaningful security framework would be implemented quickly. As I suspected, it would be wiser to seek alternative solutions in the interim. Rocksmith, I agree wholeheartedly. Where does the dissent come from?
Well, I think that this line by Oliver is fascinating. He says, well, I'll be. I hadn't realized the two of you had become such good chums. Would you care to also settle the territorial dispute over the Nord Highlands today while you're at it? Because the Nord Highlands are another area that's contested by Erebonia and Calvert in a bit more of a hot way than Crossbell. And so he's pointing out, like, you two are at each other's throats all the time, but now you're in agreement? Like, what the fuck's going on?
He's learning more about not just Calvert, but about Osborne and Osborne's plans and plots, I think, throughout this conference. And I think it's a bit unsettling. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's kind of odd because he should know the better picture of who Osborne is through all the years spent observing him in close quarters, relatively.
Well, I agree with you. That's why I don't see why you're saying that he's learning about this with Osborne for the first time.
Well, the way I didn't know you'd become such close chums. Wouldn't you expect Osborne to use something like this?
You probably would, but it's still a perfectly good thing to say, especially in a public setting for performance. We have to remember that all of this isn't just like a private dialogue sitting at a bar amongst friends. I mean, this is a guy on, being covered by the press, speaking to the dignitaries of the world, pointing out, isn't it weird that the two imperialist powers are all of a sudden happy about this when they're fighting on other fronts?
And again, Oliver is the one to make very clear that Erebonia is not a unified nation. He exposed the facts the first time. He's doing
Yeah.
it again here. I believe he'll do it again in a short little bit. It's a very public, like you say, statement that Oliver does not support the chancellor, and I wonder if he wants others to think, well, who else doesn't support the chancellor besides Duke Cayenne-Co?
I do think it's interesting that whenever Olivier, like he makes bricks with Osborne, and then Osborne kind of like still tries to keep him in the fold. But here, like Rocksmith says, point well taken. Osborne says we'll have to leave discussing that matter for another day. He's not like rebuking Oliver or Olivier. They're just moving past. So he does that again a little bit later on.
He would look bad. He could not help his position by arguing one word with the prince.
So this is pretty much the end of the preliminaries. So why don't we move on to scene 32, in which Osborne really like lays down the hammer. So I'll start.
Excellency, Excellency, what was that you just said? My apologies, but would you please repeat yourself?
Osborne goes, I'll gladly say it as many times as you'd like. Disband the Crossbell Guardian Force. In its place, have the security forces of other countries permanently stationed in Crossbell. This is the most logical course of action. You have to admit, Kevin, it's pretty ballsy to do that in the middle of a trade conference about the nation who's hosting you.
Show of just utter disregard. I can go into your home, into what could be the lion's den, say you will be my vassal even more, and I'm not worried anyone's going to do anything about it. Wild take. What if someone just took out a gun and shot him right when he said this.
It would be something.
His cause could come crashing down. It seems dependent on Osborn, all his reform. It's all like a pointy pyramid centered on him. He's not afraid of anything.
I mean, there is a whole faction behind him. I don't think we don't know that much about that structure at this point.
And Mira Crow is like, man, I am not having a good time, bro.
Yeah, this is not going well for him at the trade conference. Princess Claudia jumps in. Please wait a moment. Surely you are not forgetting the terms of the non-aggression pact, Chancellor Osborne.
Chancellor Osborn would never forget the terms of the Kellogg-Briand Pact.
Parallelism. Why don't you read what he says, though?
I do wonder if that is meant to be the parallel. I think it would be multilateral. We don't use war. Let's go on.
It's something we could look into for a sidebar someday.
Of course not. We agreed not to use force to solve disputes in or over Crossbell. This, however, is not an attempt at invasion. I am merely stating the obvious. A useless, pseudo-military organization that loses control and threatens its own people's lives should be disbanded. The should be is arguable. Is what comes before that arguable? It's not. I don't think it's useful.
You know, Kevin, when I first read this line, you want to know what my first thought was? It was G.
Yes,
This sounds a lot like Kevin Bloomfield.
Crossbell's military is not a military. It has bad doctrine and it's a big poo poo head.
So, what you guys don't realize behind the scenes is that Kevin talks to me all the time, right? He sends me a message the other day stating that if Crossbell gets invaded, that we should have a sidebar episode on how one would defend Crossbell. And this is not the first time that he has had this idea. And I am not a tactician. I am not a military guy. I don't know how much I could contribute to that discussion. But I do think it would be funny that if this were to happen, because we don't know what's going to happen, but if this were to happen, that we just put a microphone right in front of Kevin's mouth and let him talk for 30 minutes about how you would defend Crossbell.
Now, if I was a small country with built up industry, an urban population, and not do defense in depth, I would not have as a mainstay of my military armored cars as opposed to super heavy tanks. An armored car is good for projecting force across scattered outposts, wide terrain, or if you don't have the ability to have actual armored tanks. That explains none of Crossbell's needs or abilities. Their defense forces, give me 50 good people, I could take over Crossbell and rule like a tyrant.
Kevin, no, you couldn't. No, you couldn't.
Yes, I could. Well, we'll see about that.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, Osborne says this, pretty like strong statement, disband the Guardian Force. And then he goes on, and this kind of sounds like Kevin too. In practice, the Crossbell Guardian Force is inconsequential when placed before the Imperial or even Republican armies. In front of true tanks, the CGF's armored cars may as well be made of paper. To say nothing of the drain on Crossbelly and Mira it costs to maintain. Leave matters of state security to foreign military forces. This is the best and most cost-efficient solution for a mere autonomous territory.
He is 100% right.
I gotta say, he's right about the technical aspects of the military, perhaps. But I gotta say, we've seen time and time again throughout history. I mean, I'm thinking of like the lead up to the Peloponnesian War, perhaps Warsaw Pact type of stuff, that when you outsource defense to a larger power by only paying cash payments, perhaps, which is not even what he's suggesting here, but happened like with the Greek islanders to Athens, over time, the autonomy that you have begins to erode because the number one thing keeping you sovereign is your ability to keep yourself sovereign. And if you outsource your defense, you lose the ability to fight for that. So, yes, logically speaking, Crossbell might be better off if they just, let other people defend them. It's one of the reasons why Europe is able to spend so much money on social programs, is because NATO takes care of them. But they still have a fucking military, and they can fight back if they need to. Plus, America doesn't really want to conquer them. They live an ocean away. Here, it's a completely different story, and Crossbell would be out of their goddamn minds to accept this proposal.
Condominiums are not common. By that I mean the literal sense of more than one polity sharing ownership and control and governance of another part. There's Andorra, France, and Spain. It used to be on Cyprus between the Byzantines and the Caliphate for a good number of centuries, but they don't last because the two sharing states, most of the time, one of them wants to be the sole power, if not both.
So then Prince Albert points out, I think that's too radical. Another word that Heaven likes to use. And then Olivier points out, and just how do you propose these foreign military forces be designated? Are you suggesting that it be the Imperial Army? And then this response by Osborne is like a masterclass at problem redefinition.
Ha ha ha. I don't recall saying that. Then again, I'm willing to forgive Crossbell's past transgressions and offer the Imperial Army's assistance if necessary. It's a small price to pay for the sake of peace in Western Zemuria, wouldn't you say?
Yes, the warmonger over here, bringing peace to everybody. I mean, let's not forget how he almost invaded Liberl again because he had gas tanks. Let's not forget how he is a lot at the cause of the gridlock that Crossbell faces, but now he's going to forgive Crossbell for transgressions, I don't know what transgressions, and defend them out of the kindness of his own heart.
He was going to intervene in Liberal to help the security in a time of crisis. He's willing to help Crossbell, even though they sinned against him. He's a really good dude.
Oh, he's great. He's like Hannibal walking into the Italian peninsula and telling the Italians that he came to fight Rome on their behalf. So why don't you show us what Rocksmith says?
Then Rocksmith says, and there is a different proposal.
Yes, you're right. You're right.
Settle down, everyone. There's no reason to get. I agree the Chancellor's proposal is a bit drastic. However, I share his opinion that the CGF leaves much to be desired and is wholly inadequate when it comes to state security. And then Rocksmith has a empty panel of him looking smug, eyes closed, smirk on his face. Osborne says, "Oh, what would you propose then?" Then Rocksmith, "This is only a suggestion, but I would propose beginning with mass reduction of Guardian Force enrollment levels. In exchange, Calvary will assume responsibility for Tangram Gate, and Erebonia can do the same for Belgard Gate. That way, both armies will be able to respond to emergencies even here in Crossbell City."
One of my favorite political scientists is a guy named E. E. Schetschneider, who pointed out that the key to winning a political conflict, and by political, he doesn't mean like war, he means like, winning votes and shit like that, is that you have to control what the alternatives are. The alternatives being the two things that you're choosing between. So before, when it was just Osborne's proposal, it would be disband the CGF or not. Now it's okay, we're weighing between disbanding the CGF and relying entirely on foreign troops, or keep the CGF a little bit small and rely on foreign troops. The common baseline there is both Erebonia and Calvert coming in with their troops. And if something doesn't happen soon, and this is how the discourse is dominated, then that's it for Crossbell. Like somebody, whether it be Dieter Croy or Speaker McDowell, has to present a third option that can redefine this conflict because things are not looking good for them.
Which one do you think would be better for Crossbell?
I mean, better for Crossbell, you'd have to go with Rocksmith because you still have something. You still have. Well, actually, let me take this back a little bit. So, the implications of the Rocksmith thing is that both Erebonia and Calvert are cooperating, and Crossbell has a lower military force. This strengthens both of their contested sovereigns. With Osborne's plan, the foreign troops had not yet been defined, and he had offered the Imperial Army. That allows for the possibility that it's only the Imperial troops, in which, if that is the case, then this allows, after like some indeterminate amount of time in which maybe there's an incident with Erebonia, that Crossbell could then turn to Calvert and bring them in on their side to fight back. Rocksmith's position, ironically, is better at keeping Crossbell down by giving them just a little bit more liberty.
Yeah, I don't know. It's tough. I mean, it's between two awful options, essentially. And I don't see how Crossbow could recover from either.
Something like huge would have to happen outside of the political realm.
Yeah.
I think that we're getting to the end, and I hope so because this has been going on for a while. Chancellor Osborne says what?
Prince Albert asks, "Isn't that no better, Mr. President?" And then Osborne answers for him. Well, interjects. It's worth consideration. You're an impressive man, President Rocksmith. You managed to be an excellent statesman and leader, all while fending off staunch political opposition.
Not compared to you, Chancellor. You're reforming an entire empire while suppressing the influence of disgruntled nobles. Which is ironic because both their staunch political opposition and disgruntled nobles are about to come marching in through that door in a joint terrorist attack.
Rocksmith looks so happy in that little portrait of his.
Well, because I mean, I think they both see what they're doing, and then even when they're in conflict, the outcome is beneficial for them both, which Chloe recognizes, right? This can't be happening. That's what it means. And Olivier points out there are more than two countries at this conference, but at this point, Rocksmith and Osborne, they don't care.
Well, Osborne says, "I owe you an apology. I wasn't really familiar with your game."
He does not say that at all.
It's a meme, Colin.
It's not a good meme.
Famous one.
Well, anyway, so Osborne opens up the conversation, turning to the leaders of Crossbell. Would you two mind giving us your opinions on the idea? Of which,
It's hilarious. Like, it's funny.
well, it's hilarious. It's also not. And I think we're going to have to call it after this, and maybe we return to other stuff later. But McDowell says nothing, and then you can tell with Mayor Croyce that he has something to say. He's been sitting there. He's been listening to the abuse of his country. He finally comes out and says, "I want to offer my own suggestion," which he's about to present, and then a terrorist attack happens. And so then, of course, we play the game. When he comes back, it's at that moment when he says, "I'm going to put this question to Crossbell if we would like to declare independence." And I think that we can debate the measures if Crossbell really should be independent or not. But having gone through this conference, I don't see anything else Croyce could have done if he wanted to maintain the sovereignty of Crossbell. There was no way at that point that the status quo was going to hold, and he had to do something bold in order to keep it.
It's a unilateral declaration of independence, and it changed the conversation or provided additional conversation from what should have been great fodder for Osborne and Rocksmith of what the hell, we almost died. This was awful. Crossbell is even less in control than we thought. And it kind of crowds out that narrative and makes them respond to the UDI, the Unilateral Declaration of Independence, because now Crossbell has been on the back for quite some time with these proposals and in general. Now they're taking the step, forcing others to respond. I don't think it's a good way forward, but I do agree it is the only way forward. It is the only way to offer a slim chance of success.
The other thing that I think is interesting, and we'll be talking more about this later as things go, is that it's not an immediate declaration of independence. It's a declaration of intent, but he is going to put it to a referendum. He states he's putting it to the people, right? Which then means that if like Erebonia comes and marches in, or Calvert comes and marches in, especially this is especially bad for a nation like Calvert that's supposed to be founded on democratic principles, that then you're marching into a city to put down a people that had been autonomous and are exercising their democratic voice to become independent. It also gives Crossbell, like the time between now and the election, gives them time to work up sympathy abroad by like publishing newspapers and meeting with dignitaries and stuff like that. We're going to have to see how things go, but I have to say that this move by Croyce instantly turns it gives him the initiative. There's things that he has to do to back it up, but I think that he could pull it off. I think that like if this were a real world scenario and like I don't know how it ends and things like that, I would be pretty proud of my mayor for doing that.
I would too. I think I'd see it. Maybe I'm a bit more cynical as a desperate throw of the die that's gonna probably fail, but you may as well go out with your head held high.
At the very least, I think you'd want to see your leaders be strong as opposed to just giving in to the overweening powers.
Did you ever see A Lion in Winter film from the late 60s about the court of King Henry the Second of England?
Nope.
There's a great line in which Richard, Prince of the Lionheart, John, and Geoffrey are going to be executed. And Richard wants to die on his feet when his father comes to kill them. And his brother, John, who would become John Lackland, John the Coward, you're going to die, you're going to fall. What's it matter? And Richard says, when the fall is all that's left, it matters a great deal.
That is a good line.
And that's, yeah,
Kevin, Kevin, there's still stuff we got to talk about. We still got to talk about Jaegers, about how Erebonia and Calvard seemed to be aware of what was going on, the fact that these two terrorist organizations joined up and how this impacts things. We'll have to talk behind the scenes whether we do another episode on this or if we bring that into our discussion of the intermission. We probably might want to do that. But I think that we got a lot of meat here, and I don't want us to keep going on for another hour.
we have to talk about how states get legitimacy in Zamiria, the role of the Pope, the massacre, I think the very first on screen death of normal people in the game series so far. Talk a bit about the boss fight in the game.
Hold on, we need to talk about that. Hold on, whoa, 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 whoa. What fucking normal people are you talking about?
The Red Constellation massacre, the end of the chapter. I don't recall.
Yeah, you mean the massacre of the
Yes, but
terrorists?
the other times we've seen death on screen, it's been like Weissman or Gunter, people like very specific people who in like very unique, so to speak, circumstances. But here they're gunned down, they're dead, and I do think that's the first time that we've seen that kind of blasé approach to on-screen death in the games.
That I agree with, but I want to push back as well because you have in the doc about how you're not sure if these are the terrorists or innocents or stuff like that. And like it's very clear that these are the terrorists that invaded the tower and then the Red Constellation killed them as per their contract with Erebonia.
Well, I did not say are they innocent. I meant like normal people, opponents. Like they're not the big bad, not significant to the plot. They're not dabbling with the supernatural. And that's been the main, I think, the only times we've seen people die in some connection. Weissman, Gunter. If you mess with the supernatural in certain ways and you don't do it successfully, the penalty is death. Here, they were gunned down in a mundane dispute.
Sure, I think we're going to have to leave it there for now.
Until then, I'm Kevin. That's Colin.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Bye bye.